This is episode 1 of America the Exceptional. It's titled after the book that I wrote about America. And I decided to start doing this today, which is September 11th memorial of the tragic attacks that took place 24 years ago. And I have to say that I start this thing with a little bit of anxiety because I am now doing it in the wake of the assassination of Charlie Kirk. And I say to myself, why didn't I do this sooner? The important thing to remember is that we are an exceptional nation. It's the reason why I wrote the book. And people can be discouraged. And what I want to do is I want to make this into a podcast where people can be encouraged. It's not possible to reach everyone immediately, but there are people of faith that are out there doing work like Charlie, and there are also people that may be looking around and they're mesmerized by the place that the country is in right now. And I have to say, going back to 24 years ago, America has devolved quite a bit. But that is maybe the reason why we get into it. And so I think what I want to address first is the fact that we are a Christian nation. And a lot of people might try to debate that. The point being that we don't compel anyone to be Christian, but everything that we are as a nation defined is Christian. And that we need to continue that way if we want to seek the favor of God, which is exactly what the Founding Fathers intended. And to kind of prove that point, I'm going to give you a fact. The United States Congress, on September the 11th, 1777, appropriated money to purchase 20,000 copies of the Bible. And 5 years later, on September the 10th, 1782, the Congress authorized the publishing of an American version of the Bible. They didn't do that for any other books. They didn't do that for any of the classics or any of the philosophers that they had listened to, John Locke or any of these people. They bought Bibles. They show their true intention. Now we can ask why America is devolving at this point, so that there's a murder of somebody like a Charlie Kirk when we claim that we're a free nation. But it kind of can be expected, because when you don't embrace God, there's a consequence to it. And so the founders did embrace God. And I'll talk first, though. I want to read Psalm 81. It says, quotes, "So I let them go according to the desires of their heart. They shall walk in their own invention." And then in Romans, St. Paul says, "They changed the glory of the incorruptible God into the likeness of the image of corruptible man. Wherefore God gave them up to the desires of their heart." So I think that's enough said on that. Now I want to turn and give you a little bit more pride in your country. I want to read the first paragraph of the Declaration of Independence. It says, "When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth a separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation." So I'm going to stop there for just a second, and I want to tell you, I'm going to point once again to those words. They point to the laws of nature, worthy of some reflection. What are those laws that they're talking about? And nature's God. So, there is, when you think about Charlie Kirk, and you think about how someone could be motivated to do something like that, you got to realize that something is possessing them. The laws of nature and nature's God are pointing to the one God, the one that created us. And that's why the following paragraph really expounds on it and identifies that God. Continues, it says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. They are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed." So I ask you, if you're saying all men are created equal, and who is that person that did the creating? And if we're endowed by that Creator, what does that mean? Well, I think it means that we were given a gift, and that means that Creator loves his creation. And at least we know, because the founders wrote it and decided to pen it for all eternity, that they believed it and thought it was the most important thing that they could do. It's the first things that they wrote to make a public statement about who the country is. And so this country is unique. It is unlike not just any other country that exists on the planet, but it is unique to any country that's ever existed, because the birth of nations throughout the course of human history, they're related to physical things, whether it's our genetics, geography, whatever. They came from physical things. The birth of this nation, and it's the fact, just when you think about us as a conglomeration of all the world's peoples, it's an interesting point that we're created on this premise that I just read. And so that becomes an umbrella for everyone that wants hope and sees the words defining them to come here and become one of us. So we watch in the public eye, and I tell you to beware, because we see that narratives are driven, and they seem often to try to steer us away from these beginnings, to try to tear us away from it. Words like saying we're a nation of immigrants. Well, that's obvious. However, we are not really. We're actually a nation of Americans, because everyone that reads these words and wants to live by them makes himself American, regardless of what his past was. My grandparents came from other countries, and they came here because of these words. So any other motivation to come here really becomes kind of cheap. The real motivation should be because here we've said exactly what a person is and what he's worth. That's kind of really the purpose of this podcast. And it seems like, when we talk about freedom, I remember I had a story. I spoke to a college student, and it was around the time that I was writing my book. So I asked him, I said, what is freedom? So his answer was, freedom is, you have the ability to choose for yourself what you want. And so I asked him a couple of questions. I said, well, first, does that mean that there's no limits to it? And he said, no, there has to be limits. And I said, well, we'll talk about it. All right. I said, yeah, the limits are, you can't go all one way or the other. So if you have complete unbridled freedom, I told him, so then you have anarchy, right? And that's a good one for us to dwell on a little bit. But if you have the other side of it, which is a complete suppression of any of your choices, where you can choose nothing, well, then you have tyranny, which is kind of what the purpose of the founding was, to prevent tyranny, to prevent us from having our freedoms removed. So I said, so then what is a fair description of freedom? So he said, well, he goes, it's somewhere in the middle, and you just draw a line. Yeah, I'll tell you what I answered him, and I'll let you dwell on it, but it can't really be a line in the middle. If you draw a line in the middle, between tyranny and anarchy, you have this middle ground, and wherever, where that line is placed, 8 billion people on the planet, you're going to have 8 billion lines. Everybody's going to differ in some regard. It really tells you that the boundaries of freedom, they're not determined by man, because then man can change that boundary, and you may not like where it changes to. No, there's something outside of man that has to actually set the boundaries for your freedom. And this becomes the actual need and the definition of God created us. It's almost like a locomotive train, right? It's created for a purpose, and it runs on tracks. It's propelled by power, whatever power that you use. But you can't just arbitrarily just say, I'm going to remove the tracks and send it off, and because I want to, because then it just goes off and it crashes. Kind of the same way with the human being. If we assume that we're created, the Creator has a purpose and an intent. He's given us tools to accomplish those things. And so therefore we can't really deviate from that without harming ourselves. And we'll end up crashing. And I think that history has borne that out, and that's exactly what we see. So, I quoted C.S. Lewis, the Lion and the Witch and the Wardrobe author. He's highly respected. He said, if you are on the wrong road, progress means doing an about turn and walking back to the right road. And in that case, the man who turns back soonest is the most progressive man. Well, I think it's time to turn back. I don't think we want to have this false definition of what being progressive is and take ourselves off the tracks. So what are we turning back to? Is it just adherence to the Declaration of Independence? Because there you can be looking with kind of despair and saying, hey, I'm trying to do that, but I'm watching Charlie Kirk get assassinated. I'm looking at a culture that's devolving, and you could be discouraged. No, it's an incredible hope, right? Because Jesus suffered and died on the cross for our sins, and interestingly enough, one person did actually turn back and walked back to the right road, and that was the good thief who was actually hanging on a cross right next to Jesus, spent his whole life basically moving toward condemnation, and in an instant turned it around. It begins with turning ourselves around, and then remembering that we are united, the United States united in this cause, the cause that is the Declaration of Independence. The motivation that generated the Constitution comes before we begin even debating the Constitution, because if we're not changing the Constitution to strengthen the statements in the Declaration of Independence, then we're doing useless work. And I would say, I've also written, unfortunately, men seem to lose sight of the value and the cost of their freedom. The aim of the ambitious and evil, to take our freedom, and what life looks like when it is gone. In other words, we lose sight of what life looks like when freedom is gone because we haven't experienced it personally. Alexander Solzhenitsyn wrote a lot about that. He did experience it. Of course, the ancient Jews also experienced it, and they took God to actually free them from the most powerful nation, which was a godless nation, a nation of idols in ancient Egypt. And there's many proofs and I will go on in future episodes to talk about them, where our founding fathers many times stated that America was like the New Jerusalem. It was a new Exodus. So that continuation, just like the ancient Jews into Christianity and the Messiah, which is the Son of God, Jesus Christ. Similarly, we move on, and what would have been Jerusalem, Israel, becomes the United States of America, where the true faith actually emerges to form a country. So really, right now is kind of a wake-up call, and I'll do my best to defend those truths in future episodes, but just want to thank you to anyone who is watching, and to look forward to future episodes. All right, remember to pray for all of those that died on September 11th. God bless you.